All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I do welcome you here to Bunjil Place, to the City of Casey, to the Metropolitan Transport Forum. My name is Cameron Boardman. I'm one of the three administrators here at the City of Casey, and to avoid any confusion of what the role of administrator is, we, along with my colleagues Nolene Duff and Miguel Barma, we are in fact the council here. So I am in fact a councillor, and it is my delight to be your Master of Ceremonies and officiator at this forum this evening. We have a number of people in the audience, obviously. We have a number of people who are joining us online tonight in the live feed. We will be recording this and it will be available for viewing shortly after the event tonight. As I said, this is a combined event with the City of Casey and the Metropolitan Transport Forum, and we've got Greg here from the MTF. And for those that are unfamiliar with what the MTF is, it's a local government interest group for transport in metropolitan Melbourne. It's been established for over 20 years. There are 26 metropolitan local governments currently involved in the forum as members, of which the City of Casey is one. And there's a number of associate members from across the transport sector, including the state government, transport consultants, contractors, and anyone who wants any further information, please go to mtf.org.au. We have three very special guests here tonight who are representing their political parties, either as local members or as candidates, and we will have an opportunity shortly to ask them questions that relate to transport in this part of the world, and we will be very interested in their answers. The rules of engagement, gentlemen, will be, I'm going to give some introductory remarks shortly, then I'll invite you to give your introductory remarks, 6 minutes each. Greg will buzz you at 5 minutes, so you have a minute left. And at the end of that, we will go straight into questions from the audience. We understand that you've been provided with details of possible topics to talk about tonight. And if we don't have enough questions coming from the audience, I will certainly come in and ask some questions on behalf of the City of Casey. The gentlemen up on the stage have drawn cards to determine the order of speaking. And the order of speaking will be, and I'll now give a short introduction to each of them, will be Mr. Alex Breskin to my immediate left. He is the Greens candidate for South East Metropolitan Region. Alex is a software engineer by trade and has worked closely with local community groups, including residents associations and campaigns such as the Residents Against the Mordialloc Freeway, and certainly has a focus on the environment. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please welcome Alex Breskin. Our second speaker is Mr. Michael Galea, who is the Labor candidate also for the South East Metropolitan Region. Michael is a lifetime South East resident. He works as an organiser for the Retail Workers Union, the SDA. He ran as the Labor candidate for Gembrook at the 2018 state election. And Michael let me know that he's number one on the ticket, so there's a fair chance in a very short period of time you will be a member of the Legislative Council. Michael, would you please welcome Michael Galea. And our final representative is Mr. Brad Battin. He is the member for Gembrook, currently representing the Liberal Party. Brad was elected in 2010. He is currently the Shadow Minister for Police, Emergency Services, Community Safety and Victim Support and Corrections, and he's also the endorsed Liberal candidates for the newly defined Berwick electorate at the upcoming election. Please welcome Mr. Brad Battin. We have a number of other members of Parliament and candidates in the room tonight. I'm going to introduce them individually and ask them to stand in their place. We don't need to offer any applause, but just to let you know that there are other candidates and member of Parliaments here, and if you would like to make yourself known to them and ask them, I should say, any specific questions, they would be delighted to take those questions. Firstly, we have the Honourable Gordon Rich Phillips, member of the Legislative Council, member for South East Metropolitan Region. Welcome, Mr. Rich Phillips. We have Stephen Capon, the independent candidate for Narre-Warren North. G'day, Stephen, welcome. Timothy Dragon, the Liberal candidate for Narre-Warren North. Timothy. We have Laura McLean, the Greens candidate for Narre-Warren North. Welcome, Laura. And Hayley Perry, the Greens candidate for the seat of Berwick. Welcome, Hayley. Do we have any other candidates in the room that I might have missed? That being the case, then we will move on with tonight's process. So just give you a little bit of background on where we are at the City of Casey. We're a municipality that is one of the fastest growing, not just in Victoria, but in the entire country. We are rapidly approaching 400,000 residents. We have roughly 100 families moving into this municipality every single week. We have over 5,500 babies born every single year. So that puts it in context where we're not just an aspirational municipality, but we're also becoming a congested municipality. We must be doing something right that we have so many people wanting to live here, but with that growth goes a number of challenges. And one of those particular challenges which we will be talking about tonight, of course, is transport. When we go through our community engagement processes, either through the Casey Conversations, through the Shape Your City engagement, through the comments and feedback we receive on our strategic domain strategies, on any comments and feedback we receive on our budgets or financial statements, the emerging issue of congestion, of quality of living, of transport, of amenity, of safety are always at the top of the list. And as part of our role in representing yourselves as the administrators and by extension the council laws is ensuring that we're providing the right level of advocacy to all levels of government to ensure that this municipality gets its fair share. We have a number of priority projects and a number of active transport engagements that we are currently working with the state and the Commonwealth governments to seek funding to make this municipality more livable and easier from our transport, from our health, and to bust some of those congestion issues that we are dealing with. Two of the priority projects that we are currently advocating for is, of course, the Clyde Rail Link and the Clyde Road Corridor Upgrade, which I will talk about in a little more detail in a moment. But we also have 8 other projects which we think are of critical importance to the future growth and prosperity of this municipality. And they include the Soldiers Road pedestrian bridge over the Princess Freeway, the Hallam Road duplication, the Evans Road duplication, the Greaves and Pound Road upgrade, the Princess Highway and Consternation Avenue Berwick upgrade, the High Street and Lyle Street Cranbourne upgrade, and the Narre Warren-Cranbourne Road corridor study. But importantly, we aren't just trying to advocate on behalf of the municipality on road upgrades. There are many other public transport programs and projects that we need to continue to ensure that this municipality receives its fair share. And importantly, we are seeking from the state government a commitment to assist us with our bus network, to look at current challenges, current issues within the bus networks, and to identify improvements in the future that hopefully can lead to a much smoother flow of people who use buses accordingly. We also acknowledge that with some of the infrastructure challenges within the municipality, that many of you, probably even tonight as you came to this particular forum, spend many hours stuck in traffic. It's a quality of life issue, it's a health issue, and we all know that you would much rather be spending time with your friends and family. So with the engagement, with the advocacy, with the leadership that we can potentially represent you with our state representatives, we hope that a number of these issues will be addressed. Our key priorities over the next 4 years are very clearly alleviating transport congestion, improving safety and efficiency, creating and connecting more people to jobs, and improving access and services and facilities. Now, I did mention that we will be talking about a number of the priority projects in a moment, but particularly I do want to make specific reference to Thompson's Road. And it's been reviewed by independent advisors that the Thompson's Road upgrade and the extension could potentially unlock and lead to the development of 80,000 new jobs. It could also deliver tens of billions of dollars of investment to the region. In the last 5 years, there have been 265 crashes on this particular stretch of road. It was ranked 8th in the 2021 AAMI crash index of the nation's most dangerous roads. It is undoubtedly a priority that this municipality takes seriously, and I'm sure that our guests tonight will do so. So the rules of engagement, before I introduce each of our speakers, are very clear. This is the opportunity for you to hear from them, for you to communicate your views, to ask any questions and to seek answers. As I said in my opening remarks, we will be starting the forum by inviting each of the speakers in the order that they have drawn the cards as I introduce themselves to speak for 6 minutes. Greg from the Metropolitan Transport Forum will give a buzz at 5 minutes to let you know you have 1 minute to go, but in your introductory remarks, we would certainly like to understand your vision for the municipality and for the South East, your party's key commitments, and any other challenges or information that you think is relevant. After we've heard from each of the candidates, which should take us to about 7 p.m, we will be in a situation to then throw it over to everyone here in the auditorium to ask questions. I certainly have a number of questions that if some people are shy enough not to do so, I will ask on behalf of the City of Casey. But we also have a number of questions that have been written in by community representatives prior to tonight. So there's no further need for me to speak because I am not the reason you are here. The reason you are here is to hear from our 3 guests, and it is now my delight to introduce, in the order that they have drawn their cards, Mr. Alex Breslin to talk for 6 minutes on behalf of the Australian Green. Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I use that?
Certainly.
And thank you very much, Cameron. And I'd also like to pay acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, to the Bunurong and the Wairarong people of the Kulin Nations, and pay respects to their elders past and present, and put forward my support for treaty and truth-telling here in Victoria to help heal and address wrongs of the past. Thank you to the MTF and Greg for organising this, for putting on tonight, and the City of Casey for hosting. Casey Council has been doing some terrific work on transport recently. Particularly, there's some commendable work from the city in advocating for Clyde Rail as well as the Great Southern Rail Trail. I've had a good opportunity to go through the Streets Ahead plan, which is Casey Council's integrated transport strategy, and I really have to say I'm really impressed by the council and what they've been developing here. I've had good opportunity to, and I've also been quite impressed with the advocacy on rolling out the active transport infrastructure. There were 10 projects identified across Berwick, Cranbourne, Narrowara North and South districts that go a long way to getting people off the roads. But as we know, we in the southeast suburbs are in a major growth corridor for Greater Melbourne, and no council is bearing that brunt more than the City of Casey. There are some serious challenges that we need to address here. So I come here with a very clear message when it comes to transport. Transport is Victoria's biggest growing source of carbon emissions. Whilst just about all other areas such as energy is going down, transport continues to rise and forecasts continue to show that that's going to be the case. It currently equates to around 25% of Victoria's emissions, which is second only to coal-fired stations. It's quite substantial. And by far and away, the biggest contribution at around 90% is fossil fuel-powered petrol cars and trucks. So to tackle the climate crisis, Victoria needs to rapidly cut emissions from the transport sector. And at the heart of our transport policies, the state government needs to support people to make that shift out of their polluting petrol vehicles and into cleaner, cheaper, climate-friendly forms of transport. I want to put forward 4 solutions on the table to do just that. One is a clear and legislated Clean Transport Action Plan. That should cover what the government already legislated to do under the Transport Integration Act in terms of the transport plan for the future and for our state, but also to go further and set mandated targets for emission reduction and mode share targets to increase the uptake of climate-friendly modes of transport. Without that, we're seeing billions spent on transport projects, which means 200 kilometres of new or widened freeways that are going to lock in more carbon pollution, put thousands of cars more into our suburbs, and that is simply not compatible with dealing with the climate crisis. 2 is increasing the frequency of our existing public transport network, particularly throughout the day and on weekends. If you look across the day, we have waits of about 20 minutes for train and about around 15 minutes for trams or buses, or maybe up to half an hour or even an hour. People aren't willing to wait that long. And really, it's a question of operational costs rather than big spends on project infrastructure. And you don't need a massive infrastructure to run more trains, trams, or buses throughout the day. You need the funding, more better services. So let's get electric buses for commuters. We've had it costed up by the PBO some time ago. Increasing trains and trams to just 10-minute standards would be about $200 million per year. And it's what councils are asking for. Number 3 would be more electric vehicles. That includes electric buses and e-bikes. Victoria has about 5 million cars and trucks on our roads. we have got some of the most polluting, climate-damaging vehicles in the world on our streets and in our neighborhoods. About 1 million of them are over 15 years old and have the lowest possible pollution standards. In fact, the average age of a car in Victoria is over 10 years. That means we need a clear date for the end of new fossil fuel car sales. The Greens Labor government in the ACT has set a target for 2035. That's the first state or territory in Australia to do so. In the near term, certainly over the next 5 years, whilst the price between EVs and petrol is so wide, we need to reduce the barriers to the uptake of EVs with significant subsidies to lower the cost. We certainly don't need a new tax on electric vehicles. There will be yet another barrier to owning an EV, when we're already seeing that with the costs of EVs, the range of models, the charging. It's just another barrier. There's some really good initiatives overseas. In New Zealand, the Greens Labor government there has introduced a fee-based system that lowers the costs of an EV. They also have a scrap and replace scheme for people on lower incomes to get the most polluting cars off the roads and replace them with an EV, which we can easily implement here. And subsidies for electric bikes like in Europe, and rapidly increasing the number of electric buses. We're getting left behind New South Wales and should take advantage of the opportunity the electric bus brings. And 4 is a massive increase in funding for active transport. Currently in Victoria, we sit at barely 1% of our entire capital spend on riding and bike walking. Here in Casey, we know that 10% of people want to take to the streets and without the need for a car. In places where the Greens are in government, as part of the agreements for shared power in Ireland and Scotland, they've included a massive increase in funding for walking and cycling, 10 to 20% of the total capital spend on transport. And today is a special day indeed. Because this being Ride to Work Day, I can announce that we have a big bike build of hundreds of kilometres of separated bike lanes and paths across metropolitan Melbourne and regional centres. Upgrades to our streets, footpaths and crossings to make them safer and easier for people to walk around. We plan to put in $2.5 billion over the forward estimates on this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. And I'd also like to acknowledge John Hardy, Casey Senior Citizen in the Year. Great to see you here, John, and welcome very much for coming. Can I now introduce Mr. Michael Galea, the Labor candidate for the South East Metropolitan Region. And Michael, you're very welcome to use the lectern.
Thank you very much, Cameron. It's wonderful to be here with you all today. My name is Michael Galea, one of the Labor candidates for South East Metro at this election. I'd also like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the lands of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to any elders past or present who may be here with us today. I'd also like to thank the MTF and the City of Casey for hosting us today, and also acknowledge my fellow candidates here, Brad and Alex, as well as all the candidates here in the audience as well. My political story actually began with transport activism. Growing up as a teenager over in Cardinia Shire, there was a bit of a gap in services in particular, and as a teenager I ran a campaign to get better bus services, and in particular a new bus service to the major town, which is of course Pakenham. It was a long-term campaign, and with the support of the then Labor MP and the then Labor government, that service was delivered and still runs to this day. So in large part through that, that's why I'm sitting here today as well. And I'm very excited to be here today talking about Labor's record on transport for the South East and what we're going to be doing in future as well. There's a number of projects already underway, first of which worth mentioning is the Metro Tunnel. The Metro Tunnel is currently under construction. It's going to be the biggest change to the Melbourne rail network since the City Loop, and the Pakenham and Cranbourne corridors will be amongst the chief areas of Melbourne to benefit from that. The line will open in 2025 and it will enable far greater capacity for our trains to run through. And it will also mean more direct connections through not only to the city but also through to the western suburbs, and crucially in 2029 when the Airport Rail Link opens, another Labor project, that will then enable direct access to the airport from our region as well, which is really, really exciting. As part of that, I'm sure all of us here tonight have ridden on the new lovely high-capacity metro trains that are already running on the line, and those are also being stabled and maintained not far from here in Pakenham, which is really exciting to see as well, because that means more jobs for our local region. Those very big projects, obviously very important, but for me, just as important are some of the smaller scale projects too. There's been a real big project recently in the City of Casey, and that's been the Cranbourne rail line upgrade. So we've spent $750 million on upgrading the Cranbourne line. Previously, the Cranbourne line was one of the most unreliable in Melbourne. The chief reason for that is that it was mostly single track. Wherever you have a single track line, obviously you can't run as many services, but also any delays, even small delays to services, can cause knock-on effects and cause other trains to be delayed or cancelled. So what we had was a situation where even in peak hour, a nominal 20-minute frequency, one train gets cancelled, people will be waiting 40 minutes. That upgrade's now been delivered. It was completed in February this year, and as a result, we're now in a position to be providing 10-minute trains in the morning peak, which is a game change for Cranbourne residents. So that's one big example of how our policies have come into action to help transport in the local community. As, of course, anyone who's driven in the area too knows, there's roadworks all over the place, and we often get complaints about perhaps too many roadworks in some places. But just to name a few of the key projects, obviously, the Monash Freeway upgrade, which is now completed, the O'Shea Road link, which if you've driven on that, it's incredible how much time you save skipping half a Berwick to get through. All sorts of things ranging from Hallam North Road and Heatherton Road, the new traffic lights that are going in there right now, and very soon as well, exciting to see that the Five Ways intersection will also be upgraded to traffic light standard, which will be very, very important, especially for safety as well. Beyond that as well, lots of major projects that we have underway, planning towards the future as well. One such project is the Suburban Rail Loop. Suburban Rail Loop is not a project for this year or next year. It's not going to benefit us in 5 years' time. It's going to benefit us in generations and decades ahead. And it's really important. I think often governments are criticised, rightly or wrongly, for focusing on the short term. This is a government that's focusing on the short-term issues and the long-term issues as well, and that's what Suburban Rail Loop does. It's going to be transformational for our rail network, but transformational for the way that we move around this city as well. Uni students getting to Monash or Deakin, office workers going to Glen Waverley or Cheltenham, and all sorts of other opportunities haven't even been conceived yet. We're in the early stages of that. We took it to the last election, it was endorsed. We're now in the steps of early stages of that project, and we'll be proceeding with a tender for that after the election, not before. Infrastructure is very, very important, but so too are services. I've already talked about the Cranbourne line upgrade. That's one of the biggest, that's had a real big impact for that community already. But it's also, there's been a number of bus service upgrades that we have already delivered. Now, there's always going to be more work to do, and in 2021, we released our Victorian Bus Plan. That's guiding the way in which we bring about transport improvements and reforms across Melbourne and across regional Victoria as well. And there are a number of regional reviews already underway, and I'm excited to see what they will bring as well when we get them to Casey. Already though, we've brought in a number of new routes, including the 881 Thompsons Road route, the 888 on Clyde Road, the 889 Berwick to Clyde North, as well as the 760 from Cranbourne to Seaford. And on top of that, just in August this year, we've also dramatically upgraded the 897 and 898. They're the east-west buses that go from Cranbourne out to Clyde and Clyde North. Really important that we're doing that work to send the buses out to these new areas as they're being built. I think for too long in the past, governments have been slow to bring services to new areas as they need them. There's still a lot of work to do, but we're doing that work, and those recent improvements to those routes demonstrate that we're catching up and providing Clyde and Clyde North with the services that they need for a better bus network into the future. So there'll be lots more, I'm sure, than looking forward to your questions tonight here as well. But Labor has a track record, sorry, that's a terrible pun, it wasn't intended, but it's probably the best way to describe it. It is a track record of delivery, and we'll continue to do that. There's much more to be done, and a re-elected Labor government will do that. And if I'm elected as part of that government, I'm really excited to get working on a number of those projects as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Our final speaker for introductory remarks is Mr. Brad Battin, the Liberal member for Gembrook and candidate for Berwick. Brad.
Thank you very much, Cameron. It's great to be here with you all today, and thank you very much, Greg, for arranging this. It's a fantastic opportunity to talk about some of the things in the local area. Before I do start, obviously, to both the candidates here, Michael, who have had a good pass, welcome. Thank you for coming back in again. As we said last time, very important part of democracy. We did get along very well last time, and I'm sure that'll be the same this time. Alex, congratulations on putting your hand up. And I missed all of the candidates' name, but I'll say Hayley as well. I haven't actually met Hayley yet, who's running in Berwick as well. Thank you for putting your hand up in those areas as well. It's fantastic. I'm a local, lived, born and bred in this area and seen the changes that have happened through this area with our public transport and our roads and some of the impacts, the people that come into our offices that talk about the impact of what happens with public transport or roads on their everyday living, whether it's delaying them getting home, issues with the train lines, delays that have happened on the train lines. And I think when we talk about some of the projects locally, whilst we've seen some positive changes, there's also been a lot of cost blowouts in some of these projects, which could have been money invested in better services and improved services. In Berwick alone, we've obviously seen the change in Clyde Road. Now, to put it into perspective, in 2009, the Labor government duplicated that road for a cost of about $56 million, then tore part of it up to go through the grade separation process rather than doing it all in one go. This is where we have to start to consider where the waste of taxpayers' money is, so we can ensure that money is invested properly, long-term, and have positive outcomes. We are very proud with the public transport plans we're putting forward. One of the biggest obstacles for getting people onto public transport is cost. We know that people have said to us one of the things that prevents them using trains and public transport is the cost of a ticket at $9.60 for a full fare, $9.20 for a full day, $4.60 for a concession fare. And we're very proud to say we'll bring that to $2 for a full fare and $1 for concession all day, every day to get more people onto public transport and off the roads. You've got to give them that incentive. But we also have to give them the options that they want. And people like trains rather than buses when they're going in and out of the city. And when we've got a growth corridor like down in Clyde and all the way through from Cranbourne to those areas, we're very proud to announce that we will extend the railway to Clyde with a new stop at Cranbourne East. That is something the community's been calling for a long period of time. We know it's been committed back in 2002, 2006, 2014, and it still hasn't been delivered. We'll say to you that we will deliver that to make sure that trains can be caught all the way from Clyde with the growth that's happening in that area. That train station should have been there before the population started to come into those areas, not after. Otherwise, people get into habits. They get into habits of buying cars. They get into habits of driving. And it's the same issue we had down in Lakeside when for many years governments were willing to sign off on the development in Pakenham Lakeside, but at the same time weren't willing to invest in the transport and the train station they needed for Lakeside. Without that train station, more and more people have bought cars. That is something that we want to see so we can get people back onto public transport. We've also announced, we'll announce today, we've been looking at the Narrawarren and Berwick-Cranbourne roads. Berwick-Cranbourne road goes up around Sladen Street. It's a major thoroughfare. At the moment, if you drive down that, there's parts of it that have been developed particularly by developers where they're doing the sections around intersections, but a lot of that hasn't got the funding that it's required to ensure it's duplicated all the way through. So we'll announce $175 million to upgrading that road so people can travel on that road to and from those areas where we've had such growth. And we heard Cameron talk about the numbers that have moved in to these areas where we're talking about in every week 100 families a week. You can't continue to have people move in and not have that road infrastructure for people to travel on. Whilst we want to move as many as we can across to public transport, you still have to have that road network, and a road network that is working efficiently and effectively is a better outcome, not just for your time, but to stop cars stopping in those areas. Obviously, it's a positive for the environment if we keep cars keep moving. We've been very committed throughout the area also with the Beaconsfield Railway Station. One of the things that we've been very committed to, which whilst it's just in Cardinia, Beaconsfield Railway Station, for those that have used that station for a long period of time, doesn't have access to toilets, which is one issue. But one of the issues that's been highlighted to us is access for people living with disability. If you go to the Beaconsfield Railway Station, there is no cover for any person who has to go to the other end of the railway line and sit and wait whilst the train comes, whether it's raining, 40 degrees, there is no cover for you down there. At Berwick, the cover has been put on at that end so you can travel down undercover most of the way. However, at Beaconsfield, that's not available. So we've committed to upgrading Beaconsfield Railway Station to ensure that the funding put into that with the $1.5 million is not just for every person who's travelling, but it makes sure that those who need it the most, those that are most vulnerable, have safe access to their public transport. And when we talk about safety on public transport, we don't have to go back that far when people said that their biggest concern about public transport was around safety, not just on the train, when they get off the train, getting to their car, travelling at night. What was the thing that could make changes to ensure we can get more people back onto public transport? In 2010, we introduced PSOs on platforms from 6 p.m. to a last train. That policy in itself has changed the way people use public transport at night. They feel safer. They can get off the train at night. They've got two armed police officers, protective service officers, who can escort them out to the car if they require. If there's trouble on the train, they know that there's someone at the next station waiting for them. That was, at the time, a policy that was criticised quite heavily by the government of the day. When we got in, we delivered that. And now, today, not only is it a policy that Labor have endorsed, that they've wanted to extend as well. It's something that we're very, very proud of, because we know that travelling safely, travelling efficiently and cost effectively is so important here in our state.
Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much, Alex. Three very different presentations, different priorities, different lists of achievements, and I do thank you for your openness and most importantly, sticking to the time. So firstly, congratulations for that. Now we're going to move to the Q&A session of the forum, and we're going to facilitate this with Jess and Laurie, who have got some roving mics. If anyone would like to put their hand up and ask a question, please do so. You are also very welcome to come to the microphone that is at the front of the forum here. We do ask that you do identify yourself and the suburb you're from, just so we can ensure that we as the city are taking note of some of the feedback we are getting from the community. Now, I did say that, so I'll give you a little bit of time to prepare your questions and to think about how you want to approach our three panellists. But I did say that in the absence of any questions coming from the floor and from any ones that we may have prepared earlier, there is a question I'm going to kick off with, and it's a very important one, and I think all three of you did touch on this, and this concerns the Thompsons Road upgrade east of Berwick-Clyde Road to Cardinia Road, and it is without doubt one of the top, if not the top priorities of the City of Casey. So to put it in context, and I did reference this in my opening remarks, that if Thompsons Road is extended, it could potentially create an additional 80,000 jobs in this region. They could generate an additional $30 billion of economic activity over 30 years. It's got a BCR, a build cost ratio, of almost 4.5 to 1. It's endorsed by us, the City of Casey, it's endorsed by Cardinia Shire, and it's endorsed by the Greater South East Melbourne Representative Group GSEM. So my first question to you all individually, and for the purpose of Q&As, I'll ask you to remain seated. What commitment has your parties respectively made to this Thompsons Road upgrade? And whoever wants to jump in first, please do so, and keep your answers to approximately a minute if you can, please.
Just test that work. Thank you very much, and I'm sure Greg will keep us to a minute with his bell, so we've got no timing on that. Thompsons Road is something that I know I've met with the council in relation to, and at this stage I think the best thing to put on the table, we haven't made a commitment to it with it, but we are working with the council. We know we've met with developers down there as well who currently have land on both sides, the Casey and Cardinia side, looking at opening jobs and what it will create in the future. As the advocate for the area, I will continue to make sure that that voice is heard, because I know how important Thompsons Road is. I know what it will do for jobs, and I know, Cameron, you mentioned about the dollar impact, but it's actually the impact on lives in the area. If we can start to create local jobs, that's less people on the roads in the future. As I've met with the council in the past on this, and I'll meet with you again on this, but I think it's one of the priorities that's been put forward to ensure that we get the costings right on it, but I'm sure it's a road that will be delivered in the near future.
Okay, thank you, Brett. So we will clarify the Liberal Party has no commitments at this stage. Okay.
Yeah, so likewise, Labor hasn't made any commitments about Thompsons Road as yet. I'm looking forward to meeting with Casey Council next week on this subject, and I've already met with the Greater South East Melbourne Group and Cardinia Council. I know Cardinia Council in particular are very excited about it. Obviously, those job opportunities, developing Officer South as a new jobs precinct as well. Another thing that probably strikes me as a real benefit for that road is cross-town traffic, and if you're going from Cranbourne through to Pakenham or Gippsland now, you're going to end up on the Monash, and as we continue to grow our population out here, that's only going to put more and more pressure on those freeways. So obviously we've already mentioned the Monash freeway upgrade having already taken place. Thompsons Road continuing east will be a next step of reducing that impact of traffic on that freeway, and yes, likewise, no commitment today, Cameron, but there's something I'm also be very keen to work on and see what we can do.
Okay, we've got two strikes. It's over to you, Alex.
Looks like I got some bad news for you, because we don't have a commitment for it either. But with regards to our general view on roads and how we actually want to see places improve in terms of services and infrastructure, one of the main things that we know in Casey is, like I said before, is a huge growth area for the entirety of Greater Melbourne. we do want to see far more usage of public transport across the board. And when it comes to buses and things that we can actually use to get people off the roads and onto public transport, so that there are less people using the vehicles. That is precisely what we're trying to do to improve the capacity of our roads.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Alex. Ladies and gentlemen, now your turn. I would like to throw it over to the floor. If anyone has any questions I'd like to ask, please raise your hand, and we do have roving mics, or as I said, if anyone wants to come up to the microphone, please do so. Does anyone like to ask a question? So, John.
Yes. Thank you very much indeed, Cameron. My name is John Hardy. I'm a citizens advocate for people who have intellectual disabilities, mental health issues, and also physical disabilities within the, within Melbourne, but my particular area of interest being a City of Casey ratepayer and resident is in my local area, because my passion is not being having a political spin on anything, and forgive me if I sound very blunt, but to be honest, I stood at the last forum that the City of Casey ran before the last state election, and I was absolutely distressed with the sort of response I got from the Minister for Transport, who completely disregarded any type of feeling or genuine concern for people that are in our local community, even though he was my own representative in Parliament. I'd like to ask, with regard to two things, although people have acknowledged how important the Thompson's Road is and how much traffic it'll have to carry, if I can plead my own case as a person who doesn't drive. I use a seeing eye dog, and I can tell you every minute in taxis that's waiting in congestion behind other cars that are turning or just simply stationary or whatever, it might be okay to make no undertaking or no commitment for the future, but what if you had to pay the taxi fares? What if you had to waste the petrol, have the fumes, all of the things that go into the atmosphere needlessly because we ignore something? At the last forum, I was told that the Minister for Transport would not commit to building a railway station in Clyde. And that is something which, within 2 weeks of that forum taking place, there was a young lady that I visit and offer outreach services to as a volunteer in Clyde North, who in February of that year, her husband who was a young person in his early 20s, was driving his vehicle, and the lady has I'm not going to name her, has 2 young children that were under the age of 3 at the time. This chap was working very long hours to make the money for the family. Why did he work more than one job? Because there was only one car affordable in the family, and the mother had to stay home to look after the children. On his way home this night in February, prior to the last forum...
John, I might just have to interrupt and get you to ask a question. We do have other people waiting. I do apologise.
I'm sorry. Okay, so my question is, there was no undertaking for a Clyde railway station to be built, and that meant that as a result of that, a person lost their life. I want people in Clyde to be able to use a train to go to gain their employment and not be left where they can't be employed because they can't get to their place of employment early in the morning. I'd like to get a firm commitment, if that's available, from the 3 candidates, please.
Thank you, John. Just to clarify, you're asking specifically about the rail upgrade from Cranbourne to Clyde and the Clyde station?
That's exactly right, yes.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to respond?
I'll go first.
Certainly,
So with
Alex.
regards with the Greens plan, so back in 2018, we did commit to a Clyde railway station and the extension of the Cranbourne line all the way down to Clyde. Right now, we don't have such commitment. Has not come up, and that's as a side effect of not having a Member of Parliament in the South East Metro, which is part of the reason why it's so important to have a Greens Member of Parliament within this region. We do believe that rail is an absolutely important aspect of trying to improve our public transport network and trying to get people off of the roads. Because at the end of the day, it takes far more capital to put a whole bunch more people onto a vehicle and onto a road that just becomes a giant car park for everyone else, and is far less accessible than any other mode of transport, whether it's cycling or walking or otherwise just taking a bus. So I absolutely hear what you have to say, and I think that that's a really important thing that you're talking about, and the question of accessibility, making sure that people aren't being stuck on the lurch.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you for your question. And on your first point too, with taxis and that as well, I'm really sorry to hear that everyone should be able to get public transport services that let them get around no matter how, what disabilities or not that you have. Everyone should have that. So clearly there's some work to do there. In regards specifically to Clyde Rail, I'm going to disappoint you there because I'm not in a position to make that commitment tonight. The important thing that we've been doing is getting the area ready. So in terms of the Cranbourne line, like I said, the single track section was a real bottleneck. It's essential that we did that work in duplicating the line and upgrading it first. It's the equivalent of putting a 6-lane freeway down funneling into a farm road. That was really essential to do. We have started the planning work, putting $7 million in towards studies into looking at the Clyde Rail extension. I'm sure to your direct point, I'm going to disappoint you tonight by not making that commitment, but work is underway and we are looking at it still very actively.
Thank you, Michael. Brad?
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for your advocacy as well, because I know that it's an important topic for yourself in relation to Clyde Rail, and I'm pleased to say that we will commit to the Clyde Rail. And I'll be honest, I'll pick up on one point. I don't understand a $7 million study going into the need for Clyde Rail. If you walk anywhere in Clyde at the moment, you will see a population growth that is beyond most parts of this country. We've got more and more people moving in there. And to put it into perspective, the Labor Party committed to this station in 2002, 2006, and it's still not delivered. So to have a study in 2022 isn't going to deliver the services that you need, that the community there needs. We're going to put $980 million to ensure that we've got a station at Cranbourne East and one at Clyde. So any person in Clyde who's moving in there in the future will be assured that that railway line will be there. We will make sure all the grade separations are done, so we won't have any exchanges at grade. They'll be all separated to ensure for the future of that line.
Okay, so can I just seek clarification, Brad? You're committing 980, if you're elected as the incoming government, you're committing $980 million. Can you guarantee that the project will be a duplicated line?
Yes, there will be a duplicated line with the station at Cranbourne East and at Clyde. And with planning to go for further to career up in the future. And
will value capture be part of the project, and if so, where?
I couldn't tell you on the value capture at the moment on it, but I can tell you at the current plans at the moment is that with the 980 million is to extend. We've got all the details coming through which we've spoken to Council about, and we're passing all those on to you very shortly about how exactly it's going to operate.
I look forward to receiving it. Michael, Alex, would you like to respond at all? Move on? Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Sir.
My name is Ellen Mills. I'm a resident of Cranbourne. My hassle is the fact that all these new things that you're building aren't suitable for purpose. For example, none of the new stations have toilets, and a lot of the ones that are being done up now haven't got toilets. I've written to a number of people, the level crossing removal team, Cranbourne line upgrade team, Casey Council, who were great. The first informing me that they had made a number of decisions to the Cranbourne, beg your pardon, the level crossing team. The second one, I asked them how many of the new toilets on Pakenham line, new stations had toilets, I'm sorry. They said it was not their business to write to the level crossing email and gave me the email. I also wrote to the Liberal Party on the 21st of the 4th, the 7th of the 5th and the 16th of the 5th. I'm still waiting for an answer. I've written to the Greens, no answer. I've written to the local newspaper, no publication. The questions, who decided which stations should be premium and therefore be manned and therefore have toilets. Why didn't you listen to council? They put a submission to you. You just went ahead on your own. Do you know what a premium station is? You do. Do you know what a premium station
Well,
is?
we'll just do one question at a time, sir. So the question,
Sorry.
if I could paraphrase, the question is regards to the general availability of public toilets at train stations. Am I
Yes.
correct? Who would like to answer that first? Michael.
Very good question. As you correctly say, a premium station is a staffed station, and that it has other facilities such as waiting rooms and toilets. The classification of what's a premium or what's an unmanned station fundamentally comes from the Department of Transport. It's based on a number of things, usage of the station, but also whether it's a destination station or not. Now, I know there's been a lot of concern about this, in particular with regards to Maroondah Park Station. I'm not sure if that's one of the ones that you're referring to. And I know that the local member there, Pauline Richards, has heard from a lot of people about that. It is hard to change that classification because you do sort of risk some security issues of having open toilets in unstaffed stations. In terms of whether it should be or shouldn't be staffed and what, if there are any other alternatives that we can do to provide toilets at those stations. I know that Pauline's already had conversations with the Transport Minister about that and exploring options to see what we can do if we can find something to make work for explicitly for Maroondah Park, and if it works there, what we can do elsewhere as well.
Could you look at the point?
We'll just let all the other panellists answer first, please, sir, and then we'll come back.
Oh, sorry.
That's
Thank
all
you
right.
and thank you very much for the question as well. Look, with regards to the question as to which which train station should have toilets or not, my view is that one of the issues that I'm seeing with a lot of these stations is that they generally have some hostile design to attach to them as well from what their design ends up having. Like sometimes you have seats that just have a bar right in the middle of it just to try to remove homeless people from ever using it as a place to sleep and that sort of thing. There is a certain issue I see with how the state does deliver these projects, and I think that there is absolutely a need to reevaluate that myself. That's my own personal opinion rather than party position. I just need to be really short to say. With regards to toilets, though, I would like to think that most public spaces should have something that will give some level of accessibility to those. So I do hear what you're saying. I do understand what you're going through, and certainly send me across an email, and I'll try to get you some sort of satisfaction from where the Greens' position is at.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure, Alex, you'll be pleased to provide the gentleman with your contact details at the end of the forum. Brad.
And same again, I'm happy for you to contact my office direct, no dramas. But in relation to toilets, it's been a bugbear of mine for a long period of time. We've committed, and I know this isn't going to help you because this is in my electorate, but we've committed to the upgrade of Beaconsfield Railway Station. And one of the things we've committed to is putting toilets back on Beaconsfield Railway Station. We've been asking for this for the last 7 to 8 years. One of the biggest frustrations I had was Hallam Station before it got the upgrade. They put those new, and I think I'm the correct term, comfort stations they use, the silver ones, portables with the buttons, they're all secure. They put one of those on Hallam when it was an unmanned station. At exactly the same time, I got a letter from the government that said, we don't put toilets on unmanned stations. And the day I got the letter was the day they had an opening ceremony with balloons for this toilet at Hallam Station. When they upgraded Hallam, I asked a very simple request. Can we relocate that toilet? Because you're going to put a premium station in and put it at Beaconsfield where we've already got the plumbing. And the answer was no.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Now, in the absence of anyone else wanting to ask a question, sir, I'll certainly allow you to ask a subsequent question.
I asked the question and you looked at me strange, some of you. Do you know what a premium station is?
I think all of our panellists have acknowledged that and answered, sir.
I do not understand this. Government plans and government laws say there must be toilets supplied for employees. But these unmanned stations, they've got to be maintained. Where's your employees going to, or contractors go to the toilet?
I'll very quickly answer that if you'd like, but nearly every station in Victoria now has PSOs on them, and part of the upgrade of that was to put the PSOs facilities in, and they have toilets in available for contractors.
I didn't know that.
So we might let you have one more question, and then we may open back up to the floor. We want to give everyone an opportunity.
Did any of the seated tonight come here by public transport?
No.
All the way from Mentone, all the way to here? No.
No, I was too busy. I've got my car with my name all over it, I'll be honest.
That answers the question.
Thank you very much, sir. Any other questions? Okay, if there's John, we'll certainly come back to you.
Thank you. It's John Hardy again. I'd just like to, I suppose, ask a follow-up question, and that is why there is no commitment for real action in relation to roads like Thompson's Road and like the Clyde Railway Station, because the night before the rail loop, underground rail network was announced, we held our last forum that I attended, and that was when the Minister for Transport, Mr Donnellan, said that there would be no Clyde Station, but that it would be looked at in the next 4-year period, and now we're still looking, and I've got a seeing eye dog if he wants to borrow it. But what I would like to ask is, when I was a baby, they started looking at a rail loop or a rail network to the airport. Do you know what? There isn't a train to the airport yet, and I've now retired. So I wonder how long we'll all look at, like Alice in the Looking Glass. My question is, when can we expect some actual action? Because within the time before this rail loop thing is going to be built, a lot of people who are now middle-aged may well not be here, or at the very least they'll be elderly. And more importantly, within the decades to come before this is all finished, this council in the city of Casey will be larger than the state of Tasmania. So when can we get something for our taxes, please?
Thank you, John. To again paraphrase, you're seeking a definitive timeline over Thompson's Road, is that correct? Okay, so none of the candidates here tonight have committed to Thompson's Road, so it might be an academic question, but I will throw it open to anyone who would like to respond.
Thank you, Cameron. I will reiterate our Clyde Rail upgrade that the Liberals have committed to, so we will put the 980 million towards Clyde Rail. Thompson's Road, as I've said, I know we say we're looking into it, and I get people get sick of that. I suppose a disadvantage from myself is, and unfortunately I would say for myself, we've been in opposition for 19 of the last 23 years. So for the delivery around these areas, we are focused on what we have to upgrade, fix. We already know we're going to have an issue with debt. We're going to have an issue with potholes with all the way through this whole electorate. Anyone who's driving on our roads at the moment know they're probably the worst they've ever been. So we've neglected all that maintenance, which takes away money from building for the future. We know there's been cost overruns that's been reported so often. That's $28 billion that could have gone into directly building projects like Thompson's Road. I will assure you, John, and I'm happy to pass on my contact details as well. I'm happy to discuss with you as well as I will with council. I know how important Thompson's Road is. I've spoken to the schools, I've spoken to the families, the residents, the businesses, developers and the council. We want to make sure it does get done, and I'll be speaking to council more about that shortly.
Thank you, Brad. Alex.
And thank you very much, John, for the question. Like I said before, with Clyde Rail, this is something that the Greens did advocate for in the past when we did have some sort of representation within Parliament. Without that, we don't have as much power to go off and get all these costings needed. Because Clyde Rail was something that we did believe was important in 2018. It is something that we should get, in my view. But at the end of the day, if we don't have that opportunity, we don't get those opportunities for Casey Council or for residents here. That said, I do believe that we need as many rail stations as we can get. I believe that we need to improve our public transport across the board. And I think that it's quite strange in terms of how we see the distribution of public transport across the entirety of Greater Melbourne, that we see far more going northwards, but hardly any going to the east, especially out here and going towards Berwick or to Clyde or anywhere else.
Thank you, Alex. Mike, would you like to reply?
Yes, thank you. A couple of points in there. So you did mention Thompson's Road, and yes, while I can't commit that today, it's certainly fair to say that there's been a huge amount of works going on in this area for those roads. So we're talking about Western Port Highway, Hall Road, which is being done right now, Narre Warren Cranbourne Road as well. Obviously those O'Shea Road and those other projects I mentioned earlier. In addition, the level crossing removals, which have had a huge impact on traffic in the area too. So we're talking about Thompson's Road in particular, Clyde Road in Berwick, Hallam Road, and others closer into Dandenong as well on that Cranbourne-Pakenham corridor. Airport Rail, 100% agree with you. It's taken far too long, and it's taken this Andrews Labor government to come in to get it done. We're doing it. It's going to be built. I would love it to be built next year, but we're getting that work started, and it's going to be built as soon as we can. As for Clyde Rail, yes, as I said, I'm going to disappoint you on that one, but I'm really keen to talk with you further as well, so I'd love the chance to have a chat after the meeting and share my details with you.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's just a very casual observation. I might just be a little bit older than you are, just a little bit. I reckon I've heard every year for the past 30 years that the airport rail is going to be built, so I'll just put it in context, okay? Thank you very much. I think I've heard that as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Stephen Capon, I live in Narre Warren. Given that land zoning directly affects where people live and work and forces people to use cars to travel in an efficient manner, from home to work to our social gatherings, anything like that, does your party have any plans to change zoning to allow for higher density development near key transport infrastructure?
So, Stephen, we do acknowledge that you are the independent candidate for Narre Warren North, correct? Just to clarify, you're asking a question based upon the Casey planning scheme or zoning, current zoning?
Victorian planning provisions.
Okay, well, it is a transport forum, so I think we could potentially rephrase it on the basis of under the Victorian planning provisions and Plan Melbourne, the transport provisions, if your party has any plans to change any of the current provisions within the Metropolitan Planning Scheme.
Good question. As you know, there is a number of suburbs in Melbourne where such development is encouraged, so Dandenong, Frankston, things like that. They're probably the closest ones to here. I'm not aware of any in Casey, nor am I aware of any proposals to change that. However, that's something I'm happy to get back to you on in more detail with. One of the other benefits of, and this is going a bit more long-term now, but with that suburban rail loop, is that there will be a lot of potential for value capture as part of that project and transit-oriented development, which obviously only helps to feed a positive cycle for public transport usage. So it's a really important area. It doesn't mean that we have to build three-storey buildings across the city to get good public transport. We can provide those services, but transport-oriented development's a great way to improve that and enhance that. As I said, not aware of anything for Casey, but happy to come back to you on that.
Any other? Alex, would you like to make a comment?
Sure. I think one of the key things that I've seen in recent times with regards to public transport, especially with the new suburban rail loop, is it's apparently being used as an opportunity to essentially carve out entire places from the Green Wedge and out of parkland, and instead turn them into housing and to turn them into stations rather than acquiring available land that's already existing. And I think that needs to be something that needs to be called out, because that's something that Labor is doing quite a significant amount of now that they're dealing with the suburban rail loop. I think that that's something that we should be worried about, because it's not good planning. People are going to be losing those parks forever. The Green Wedge is going to continually be eroded. And that is something that is part of the reason why we're here talking about transport, because places like Clyde were essentially developed after being taken out of the Green Wedge and being brought into the urban growth boundary. That's why we're dealing with this. With regards to the party's position on whether we have any plans to increase density in any specific areas, we haven't looked into that.
Thank you, Alex. Brad, would you like to make a comment?
And I'll just quickly say, obviously we had Melbourne 2030 originally. It was looking at what we're going to do with public transport housing around those areas, but we always have said it's got to be common sense. You have to be cautious on the areas you're in. You can't tear up and change the culture of an area. And Berwick as an example, I think when they came through and they wanted to redevelop around the Berwick railway station, one of the things they wanted to do was redevelop all through Gloucester Avenue in the original plan. If you go through Gloucester Avenue, it's a beautiful area with some of the oldest homes in Berwick. To go through there and turn that into 2- and 3-storey apartments, obviously wouldn't be in the best interest of Berwick. So I think when you're doing it, you have to have a common sense approach to make sure that you're not overdeveloping in some areas, but development near railway lines does make sense, and other public transport channels, so we can get the people onto public transport.
Thank you very much. And just briefly on behalf of the City Casey, at the September Council meeting, we did complete our 4-year review of the Casey planning scheme and ensured that all of the necessary reserves for these future transport projects that I've articulated remain within the planning scheme, and planning hopefully for future infrastructure requirements. That's currently with the Minister for Planning, and I think with 12 days until caretaker, we're optimistic to get that signed off, but let's see how we go. Any other questions, sir? I think there was a question up here. Question. Okay, sir, please.
Did someone want them?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Laura, the Greens candidate for Narre Warren North. I have a question for Brad specifically. As we know, it was the Jeff Kennett Liberal government that privatised our rail network and our tram network in Victoria many, many years ago. I know that the Liberal Party has committed to reducing fares down to, did you say it was $2 a day? I'm just wondering if there's any sort of, what's that word? How do you plan to finance that? How do you plan to support our rail network and pay our train drivers and our rail support staff on if you're only charging $2 a day fares with a mostly privatised network?
Thank you very much. Laura, I don't think you're a member of the Kennett government. Other people in the room maybe, I don't know.
I was in school in the Kennett government. There you go, that's how long ago it was. But and since then there's been, as I said, 19 years of the last 23 have been Labor and re-signed contracts continuously with privatisation of our rail. Why? Because over that time it's been proven to work. But the $2 rail, we've already come forward with our costings we've released, which was $1.3 billion. One of the things we're looking at doing is shelving the Southern Rail Loop, which obviously a lot of that funding is going to be going back into health because our health system's in crisis here in Victoria, fixing our 000 crisis. And the other side of that is around the cost blowouts that the government's had. If you manage projects correctly, you have a lot of money left. Now, we've had $28 billion. $28 billion has gone into cost blowouts here in this state. That is equivalent to around about 10 more terms of government. With this money, those blowouts could have paid to get us on $2 public transport for that period of time. If we're going to get people back on public transport, one of the barriers is cost. And I think one of the best ways to get them back on right at the moment when there's a lack of confidence in public transport, a lack of people wanting to get on because of the issues with COVID. How do we do it? We make sure it's a cheap and viable option to get to work, school or a concert.
Thank you, Brad. Michael, Alex, would you like to respond?
Might just jump in quickly, just on the top of that. Yes, it's perfectly correct to say that Labor's been in government for 19 of the last 23 years. In fact, it's actually, if we're going to paint with a broad historical brush, 19 of the last 30 years, and it was within that last 30 years, towards the end of it, when I was a young tyke, that the original train line to South Gippsland was closed. So the thing specifically with $2 fares, I'll just quickly say we don't support that policy simply because it's very expensive to do, firstly. Secondly, because it also takes away from the benefit that you can gain from improving services. You improve services, you will do that in a way in which you get more patronage, more fare box revenue, less overall subsidy required. Without that, you're requiring much, much more subsidy, and every public transport improvement requires something to be taken away from something else. Thirdly, we don't support that policy because it disproportionately affects and benefits relatively affluent inner city areas, places like Brunswick, Malvern, Toorak. We need better public transport here, and I think, I know Brad said a lot of people say to him, we need cheaper. I think we need better.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. Alex, would you like to make any comments?
Look, I think one of the big things that Brad mentioned, and I just wanted to mention right now, is I think when we're dealing with the privatised sector, with the privatised nature of rail, that that really does bring quite a lot of problems with regards to trying to implement such a policy. So while I hear what you're saying, and there are probably benefits or hazards with that, I don't really want to commit ourselves one way or the other. I think that it's going to be quite difficult with a privatised sector as to whether you're going to be able to implement that. And I believe that there's going to be quite a few private companies that will probably have a few things to say. The Greens want to see this entirely made public. We do want to see this as a public service. And we think that the rampant privatisation of all our services across Melbourne, across Victoria and Australia has really been to the detriment of the public.
So, Alex, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask Michael and Brad to respond. Considering your answer is the Greens' policy to recapitalise public transport, to buy it back and put it in public hands?
There's no commitment to do that right now, no.
Okay. Anyone else would like to comment? Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
G'day, Hugh Mackenzie's my name. I think Stephen was on to something earlier. My question's not necessarily about transit-orientated development, but we've been talking a lot about delivery of transport infrastructure tonight, and I think there's a smarter way of doing it. It's about taking people off the roads or reducing the extent of the journey, and that's about bringing employment opportunities closer to where people live. You've over a number of years, a number of different governments have been approving precinct structure plans, and the residential precinct structure plan seems to have been taking precedent over employment PSPs. My question is around industrial land supply, and both sides, I don't know about the Greens, but I know Liberal and Labor have acknowledged the shortage of industrial land supply in Victoria. Keen to understand how you're going to fix that, alleviate it and respond to it.
As has the City of Casey in our domain strategy. I'm not sure if you've read it, but we also acknowledge that as well.
No, we're all over it like a rash. Thank you.
Certainly. Who'd like to comment?
First of all, I think one of the most important things I think we've always focused on is how do we get people to work locally and almost change the direction in way people travel. I know we were very pleased with the employment land, which I know Casey and Cardinia have pushed for a long period of time through Berwick and Cardinia around near O'Shea Road and going through that area there with employment land there. They also had employment land in Cardinia, which I know I can focus on. Now, my electorate used to go down as far as that, and it took a long time to get that land up and going and moving forward. And probably one of the biggest disappointments, if you want genuine larger businesses to come in there, you've got to also supply not just a road, and I remember, and I'm not an expert on this, but a city gate gas exchange so they could have the right amount of gas to have larger organisations there. One of them was Royal Canin, who wanted to come here and ended up going into Asia rather than Pakenham. We, as a government, and any government in the future, needs to ensure they've got the investment in those places. I know we're putting a lot of money into manufacturing and bringing it back. That'll be the kind of money with co-funded grants so we can get businesses off the ground locally, create more jobs locally, get more cars off the road.
Really great topic to bring up. Quickly on the industrial land sort of use, I think, I agree that's a really big area that needs attention. I know that historically industrial land's always been a lot cheaper and developers sort of erred away from it, trying to rezone as residential. Recently, industrial land, especially in this area, has been almost as valuable as residential. So that just shows the demand that's there, and things like Officer South and other projects really need that support to get up so we can do that. Specifically with jobs as well, I'd also point out that a lot of these, what we call the big build, all these transport projects that we're doing, a lot of it's with deliberately locally sourced labour, and that's from a range of obviously parts of Melbourne, but also local supporting disability providers and other groups to provide things, whether it's landscaping for railway stations or concreting for overpasses, whatever it is. Local jobs and local projects is also a really big important thing. Going back to suburban rail loop, that's a bit more long term obviously, but that's 8,000 jobs just for stage one.
Thank you. Alex?
And with regards to whether we're going to be increasing the amount of industrial land across the entirety of Melbourne, I don't believe that we have anything of that commitment. What we do, however, want to see with regards to how much we're utilising industrial land where we do have it, is to essentially turn all polluting industrial jobs into a clean renewable industry. Specifically with regards to building up our electric vehicles and bring manufacturing back here in Australia. entire industry that has essentially left. We want to make sure that they can actually build something that's going to be locally sourced and that can bring back to our economy, as well as with regards to photovoltaic cells and anything else that can jumpstart our clean, renewable future. That's where the Greens is at.
Thank you very much, Alex. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up to just past 7:40. We did say that we would be completing by 7:45 of public questions. Transport's on everyone's mind at the moment. And allow our panellists to give a wrap-up statement. So would anyone like to ask some concluding questions? We've probably got time for 2 more. Greg, certainly.
Thank you. It's not actually my question. It's one that was submitted from a member of the public and from Mr. Tim Lead. He says we waste a considerable amount of time waiting for traffic lights which are on fixed or hardly variable sequences and that are therefore dumb. It's extremely common, he says, to wait a lot of time. So what he wants to know is, when can we expect to have a more intelligent traffic lights, and how much longer do we need to put up with 60-year-old traffic light technology when there's much better options available? And I guess this is also to the broader question about how can we use technology to make our roads better.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Mr. Lee, for your question. Interesting question. Who would like to go first?
Looks like I'm the first one to the
Alex.
slaughter, hey? Can't say I actually have an answer to that particular one. That's not that's not my domain expertise. And that's the question of how do we make our roads more efficient. But I think the question there kind of assumes the paradigm of the car and how people themselves can utilize the car. And I think that really what we should be looking at is how do we get more people into buses so that we can effectively get people across, rather than to see everything as if, well, you're one person using a mode of transport all the way from where you're at to wherever you need to get to. That is that personal thing. Rather, I believe that we just need to get people to relax on whatever form of transport that they're on and get to the destination. Certainly not a thing that people can do right now. I mean, I had to travel by car because, frankly, there isn't good public transport to get from where I live right now to events like this, especially in the vast distances that is the Southeast Metro.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm sure it's an electric car. Michael.
Yeah, definitely I can't say that I'm across the technical detail of the traffic light sequencing in this region, so I can't give much of a distinct answer on that. I do know that the government implemented a sequencing project on Hoddle Street, obviously a very notorious road in the city, that was to do with coordinated and in-sync traffic light cycles. So I'm sure there's been a lot of lessons from that as well, and hopefully they can be applied, but I can't give much more of a better answer on that. I would also say one thing I do agree with you on, Alex, is more people in public transport, less people in cars, less traffic, quicker light cycles. Better for everyone.
Thank you, Michael. Brad.
Thank you very much. And in relation to, we'll call a smarter light sequence, the federal government invested in the new lights that are in O'Neill Road and going through to all the way through to Pakenham. There's about 8 intersections, and part of that will be a trial, which I know is in conjunction with Vic Roads, of how they can improve those light sequences in the future to keep traffic moving more often. And I'll reiterate on that. I know we spoke about public transport, the best options to get on public transport, and you had difficulty getting here. I think you'd challenge to get from Berwick to here at night. I've got to go to the city after. And as far as electric cars, which I think are fantastic for the future, I would love to have my electric car, but we're waiting on the order, and it takes about 2.5 years to order a car these days, so we're still waiting on one to arrive.
So, Brad, you prefer an electric car to $2 tram fares?
Would I prefer it, depending where I'm going? Because I do catch the train when I can, and I have for a long period of time. But if I was preferring which car I could drive between my Kia Seltos and a Tesla electric car, I'll take a Tesla electric car because it gives a lot better benefits for the environment and also for my back pocket, so you can put the selfish side in it. There you go.
Written, spoken, authorised by Tesla. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any further questions? Well, I'm going to take the MC's prerogative and ask you one further question. And this is a question not on behalf of the council, but it's a serious question, and it's one that's that's been an issue in this part of the world for 30 years, probably beyond, and it concerns the Port of Hastings. So we've spoken a lot about public transport, we've spoken a lot about cars and road upgrades. So successive governments have done numerous studies on the Port of Hastings to potentially make it Victoria's second container port. It's currently a bulk terminal, you'll all be very, very much aware of that. So what I'd like to know is, does your parties have a current policy either endorsing or otherwise the Port of Hastings becoming a container port? And if so, what is your plans for upgrade to the Western Port Highway to facilitate that? Who would like to go first?
I think I can quite comfortably say the Liberals have always supported the Port of Hastings. It was unfortunate the contract signed on Port of Melbourne has prevented a lot of movement on that going into the future and will delay it a long period of time. And I know Gordon's here today, and Gordon was involved in committees in relation to the Port of Hastings and put our view forward that we have always remained supportive of that in the future. Have we got a commitment to doing it right now? We have to go in and see what contracts are in place and what's going to happen with there. But as part of the Port of Hastings, we understand there'll be a transport plan. We will work with all of the councils down this way who are supportive of that port to ensure there is an effective and efficient transport plan that can be delivered in conjunction with the government to ensure that if we're going to open it, you don't have semi-trailers, B-triples, etc. travelling on roads they're not required to be on, and make sure you've got the rail network you can so you can transport things around.
Okay. Thank you, Brad. So it's a philosophical agreement that the Port of Hastings should become a multimodal container port as well as a bulk terminal, and associated road upgrades as necessary. Okay. Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I can't give you any commitment on the Port of Hastings, but I can say obviously any such project in future, we would absolutely need to make sure that that road and rail infrastructure is there for those freight trains as well, obviously to get them away from, as I agree with Brad there, those local roads, get the B-doubles off. Any such plan to reopen the Port of Hastings, you would have a number of challenges through those rail corridors, and that would be really essential. I'd want to see that, both for passenger and freight services, in order to get that up and running. But a number of other things that have certainly been looked at, and I know one such thing that the South East Council are looking at as well is the South East Melbourne Airport out in Coorab, and that's been very interesting to see as well.
Do you have a position on that?
No, not yet. Personally, my position is I'm very interested. I'm still learning lots about it.
Okay, fair enough. Alex.
I think one of the key things that we need to understand about the Port of Hastings was that it was privatised and was sold off to some completely different group instead of being a public sector port, essentially. It should be part of the current hands. It should be one of our assets, which makes things quite hard for us in terms of trying to shift and change where it is. But I think one of the other things that we're seeing here is also a lack of integrated transport plan. How do we actually deal with all of these things across the entirety of the southeast and the entirety of Greater Melbourne? I'm not aware of the Port of Hastings and this particular issue. This is the first time that I'm hearing about it. It's something that I want to hear more about and learn more about what's going on. I can't give any commitments as to whether we can improve or not this particular thing, but I would truly hope that we could nationalise this.
Sure. Well, thank you for that, Alex. It's news to me that the Port of Hastings has been privatised, so I will. I'll take that as perhaps a misunderstanding of the situation, but I can guarantee you that manufacturers in this part of the world, particularly in the Hallam corridor, are very interested in the future of the Port of Hastings, particularly as it relates to potential logistical transfer for export markets and the current challenges with the Port of Melbourne, and certainly access would not be unfamiliar to any of you. We did touch on the airport. We could talk more about the South East Airport. We could also talk a lot more about the intermodal freight hub at Lyndhurst and the future for freight transport as it relates to the road network and the employment zones which have been raised tonight, but unfortunately we are short of time. So gentlemen, we're going to reverse the order. You have 2 minutes of closing statements, and I will ask Brad to come up first with a 2 minutes closing statement. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you very much, Cameron, and thank you very much, Greg, for organising this, because I know they are so important. I think one of the things that we've heard tonight is around what we want to see as the new roads, the new public transport, the new rail, how we can improve those in the future. But I still think we missed the one thing that I think is so important that's coming to our office more and more at the moment: the maintenance of our roads here in this state. Potholes throughout Victoria which I remember were just a regional issue. It was something that we used to get in our office every so often as a regional issue. There are potholes through main roads, through Berwick, through Cranbourne. If you go down through Kooirup just the other day, they had the Victoria Police guarding a pothole because of the dangers it was causing on our roads. A government has a responsibility. It is to maintain those roads, and we will put $10 billion into those to getting it back up to standard. It is all part of our network to ensure we can have freight on the roads, to ensure people are safe, we can transport around faster. We are committed to the $2 and $1 fares for concession in relation to public transport. Most importantly for this area, we are committed to continuing our plan with the Clyde rail extension. It's disappointing that no one else has put forward this as a plan in the past to make sure it can be delivered. We have committed to it. We will deliver it because we know as you grow corridors, you can't put the public transport in too late because you start to get people, as I've said before, buying their cars because they need to get around at the start of the time when they move in there to get for employment. We'll also continue working with Council in relation to what you've said before, Cameron, with the employment land around here, because we know how important it is that people can live local and work local. It's less time on the roads, it's good for the environment, and it's good for the family as well, if you can get home earlier rather than getting stuck on freeways. We're committed to working with the Council to ensure we can deliver on their transport plans, to improve the bus services around here, and we're happy to trial new bus services in different styles with smaller buses as well in the future, so not the smaller buses on smaller roads. Thank you very much, and thank you again, Cameron, for hosting.
Thank you very much, Brad. Michael, please, 2 minutes closing statement.
Thank you, Cameron, and thank you, Greg, for keeping us to time tonight as well. In closing, I'd just like to say, firstly, a very big thank you as well to this whole group. It's been really wonderful. We've had a great mix of questions, some expected and some very unexpected, which is always great to keep us on our feet. There's been a lot of investment in this region in particular over the past 4 and 8 years under this Andrews Labor government. Level crossing removal is probably one of the keynote projects that we've done. In 2014, we announced that we'll replace 50 or remove 50 level crossings by this year. We've now removed 67, 33 of them in the southeast of Melbourne and a bunch of them right here in Casey. There's still many more to go, 14 still to go in the southeast, and that's a great example of a project that helps traffic dramatically improve safety. There are some very dangerous level crossings, not to mention some crossings near Monash Medical Centre in Clayton, Casey Hospital in Berwick, right near hospitals. Very, very dangerous when you've got an ambulance waiting at traffic at boom gates. So that's an ongoing project across Melbourne and especially affecting this area. Like I said, in 3 years' time, under a re-elected Labor government, every single level crossing in Casey will have been removed. There's a number of bigger projects, obviously, that we've talked about tonight. Smaller ones as well. It's probably not very exciting for a lot of people to hear about the 897 bus being extended up Heather Grove or anything else, but that's the important work that we're doing, whether it's big projects or small as well, and we'll continue to do that. And I'm really excited to hopefully be part of a re-elected Labor government where we can continue to deliver those things, and I'll be a voice for this Casey community as well in making sure that we get the right transport infrastructure and services that we need going forward as well. So thank you very much.
Well done. Thank you very much, Michael. And finally, Alex, please, 2 minutes closing statement.
Thank you very much, Cameron. So what I've put forward earlier today was basically a plan that will cut emissions, save costs of living by reducing the need to purchase fuel from the Bowser, reduce air pollution and make it easier to get around, and make our city and states even better places to live. And I've lived in these suburbs most of my life. The car is a paradigm to our lives, and it's something that permeates pretty much everything. And just going from event to event, you can just see the eye-watering amount and work that's been put into the next great car park that is a new road. The fact is, we still don't have Clyde Rail after so many years, and if there's any reason why people out here are so dependent on cars, which makes about 80% of all the residents, it's pretty much that. And when it comes to our state transport departments, I do believe we should have a transport system that is publicly run. We need to move away from this neoliberal fantasy that we keep putting private companies in charge of transport, whether that's planning, building, operating them, privatizing Vic roads, selling off the port. With the pressing climate crisis, we need to put public transport, in fact, all transport, back into the public hands, run in the public interest for the public good. More Greens in Parliament means that we can push the next government to go further and faster on cutting transport emissions. We need a strong voice in Parliament for climate-friendly, cheaper and accessible technology. I want to thank Cameron for helping us out tonight and being the chair, and definitely Greg for helping us out with the MTF and for organising all of this, and thank you for all the hard questions. Not everything that I could probably answer, the entire panel could answer, but it's really good to actually hear it, know what people are saying, and try to figure out how we can get a better Melbourne for everyone. Thanks.
Well done, Alex. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, and most importantly, thank you, not just for attending, but for the constructive and polite and respectful way that you have engaged yourselves tonight, and for your very well-informed questions. I'm not sure that you got the answers you were seeking, but I would like to say that on behalf of the City of Casey, we certainly pass on our thanks to the three panellists. I've been involved in a lot of these forums. That was by far one of the most polite and respectful, but it was also probably one of the most informative. And I think that all of you are not just great ambassadors for your parties, but you are certainly great ambassadors for this local area. You are undoubtedly passionate about this local area. That was clearly evident. And if you are successful in being members of Parliament, I do wish you all genuinely very best wishes. We look forward to working with you and taking up on your very kind endorsement of the projects and representing the City of Casey. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please give Brad, Michael and Alex another round of applause. And I'd also like to thank all the other candidates and members of Parliament here. I wish you all the very best, and I hope that you found this session informative and understand some of the challenges that the municipality is faced with, and hopefully some of the answers that we might be able to work together to potentially achieve. So I do thank you for your time, and equally I wish you all the very best with your election campaign. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now the conclusion of the event. Thank you very much to Greg. Thank you very much to Jess, to Anita, to Laurie, to Ellen, who's been helping us at the City of Casey, and Jordan, of course. We do have some light refreshments, some tea and coffees. For those who would like a cup of tea or coffee or a caffeine hit at 8 o'clock at night, that's the best we can do in these constrained economic times. But I do encourage you to stick around, talk to our candidates, certainly come and introduce yourself to me if you'd like to, and our staff. And again, thank you for coming, and we will see you hopefully at the next forum in 4 years, Greg. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.